Hello, horror lovers. Welcome to the chilling world of Mr. Haunt. Please subscribe. It's our biggest motivation to keep bringing you spine-tingling stories. Let us know in the comments which city you're listening from. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button. Now, let's get into the stories. I was 19 when it happened. Too old to believe in monsters. Too young to know better. That summer, I was working for the State Park Service as a seasonal trail hand. Clearing brush, repairing signs, sometimes guiding lost hikers back to the main paths. The job was simple and lonely, which was perfect for me. I wasn't the social type, not after everything that had happened back home. They assigned me to Black Hollow, a stretch of dense forest in northern Oregon, technically part of the Cascade Range, but the locals didn't call it that. Around town folks said Black Hollow, like it meant something, and maybe it did. They didn't send people up there unless they had to. When I asked why, the ranger I replaced just muttered, "Too quiet," and then he left. He didn't even stick around for the exit interview. I was given a radio, a machete, and a map with a few hand-drawn notes scribbled in pencil. One area was circled 3 times in red with a warning, "Don't patrol after dark." I laughed when I saw it. Thought it was a joke, a dare, maybe. But I learned soon enough. The first week Black Hollow was beautiful in a way most people never got to see. Moss-covered rocks, 100-year-old trees leaning like sleepy giants, and a hush over the land that made every snap of a twig feel louder than it should have been. I didn't mind it. The silence gave me time to think, and the animals, the real ones, mostly stayed away. Once I spotted a black bear way off trail, but it ran the second it saw me. What started bothering me, though, was the feeling like I was being watched all the time. No matter how deep into the woods I went, I never felt alone. I would turn around, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was nothing. Just trees. Always trees. And then came the smells. Rot. Musky, coppery rot, like blood and dead fur, and something older, something primal. It would come and go on the wind, never when I expected it, but always enough to make my stomach twist. I told myself it was just dead animals, roadkill, something natural. But then I found the carcasses, not roadkill. The elk hit was day 9 when I came across the first one, a bull elk, easily 700 pounds, torn apart like paper. Its rib cage was opened like a flower, innards gone, spine bent backward like something had twisted it until it snapped. But what really made me stop, made my hands tremble, was the way its head had been placed neatly next to the body, not ripped off. Set there, like someone was arranging it. No prints around it, no blood trail. Just that dot. I reported it to HQ over the radio. The static crackled for a minute. Then the voice of Ranger Delaney, my supervisor, came through. "Copy that. Don't touch the body. Leave the site." That's all he said. "No, we'll send someone." "No, wait there. Just leave." The second LK. Few days later, it happened again. This time, I wasn't even on patrol. I was headed back to the service cabin, 2 miles from base camp, when I smelled it. Same rot, same heavy choking scent of copper and wet fur. And then I saw it, right in front of the cabin door. Another elk. Female this time, laid out like an offering. This one didn't even have a head, just a clean stump, as if the neck had been sheared off with a blade the size of a dinner plate. I turned and ran. I didn't care about rules or gear or logging my hours. I sprinted all the way to base, busted into Delaney's office, and yelled, "What the hell is going on up there?" He looked at me like I was already too deep. Then he said the first thing that made me truly afraid. "Sometimes they come down to warn you." Warn me? He didn't answer. He just poured a shot of whiskey and slid it across the desk. Night patrollees should have quit. I should have packed my bags and disappeared like the last guy. But I didn't. Stupid pride, I guess. I told myself it was just a bear, or wolves, or something I didn't understand yet. The next week, I got my answer. They sent me to repair signage near the Three Forks Trail, where a rockfall had destroyed part of the path. I stayed too long, lost track of time. By the time I realized how dark it had gotten, I was already a mile from camp, and I wasn't alone. I heard it behind me. Footsteps, heavy ones, not the skitter of a raccoon or the distant howl of a coyote. This was different. This was deliberate. Thump, thump, crack. Something was following me, parallel to the trail. I couldn't see it, but I could hear the branches breaking under its weight. I picked up the pace, tried not to run, then it screamed. Not an animal sound, not something you hear on National Geographic. This was rage, bone, deep fury and hunger, and something that made my spine feel hollow. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached camp, panting, drenched in sweat. Delaney was waiting outside his cabin. You saw it, didn't you? I nodded. He just lit a cigarette and muttered, "Then you understand." What? I sighed. Didn't sleep that night, not with that sound echoing in my ears. By morning, I had decided to find it. Call it madness, call it obsession. But I needed to see what was out there. I needed to know. I went back to Three Forks, this time with a camera, bear spray, and my machete, and I waited. 6 hours passed. Nothing. But as the sun started to set, I heard it again. Branches, footsteps, that smell. And then, it stepped out. 8 feet tall, at least, covered in coarse, dark hair. Muscles like corded ropes under its skin. Its face was wrong, too human, but too wide. Eyes black as oil, teeth like cracked stone. It saw me, and it didn't move. I raised the camera. My hands were shaking. Too much to hit the shutter. Then it tilted its head, like it was curious, and it spoke. Not words, not English, but something. A guttural low growl that buzzed in my bones. I dropped the camera and ran. The aftermath I told Delaney. He didn't question me, just gave me the same whiskey bottle he always had, and said, "Now you're like the rest of us." "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer, because he didn't know. Some say Bigfoot, some say forest guardian, some say cursed soul of the woods, but none of those names matter, because I know this. It watches, it waits, and it remembers. When I left Black Hollow 2 weeks later, I thought I'd left it behind, but sometimes I hear that scream in my dreams, and sometimes I smell rot in places it doesn't belong, and when I look into the trees too long, I swear I see eyes staring back. I was 30 when it happened to me. Fresh out of a bad divorce and desperate for a change, I took a seasonal job with the U.S. Forest Service. My assignment: monitor wildlife activity and trail conditions up near Mount Hood in Oregon. It wasn't glamorous work, but it came with solitude, clean air, and the kind of silence I hadn't known in years. They put me in a fire lookout tower, one of those tall, narrow structures perched above the treetops. My job was to radio in anything unusual, check for signs of wildfire, and maintain a few remote trail cams. I didn't mind the isolation. After all, I'd spent most of the past year trying to be invisible. But then something found me. Something that didn't belong in those woods. Something that knew how to watch without being seen. The first few days were uneventful. The lookout tower was rustic, but solid, thick metal supports, wood paneling, reinforced windows, a ladder for access. I kept my gear organized, reviewed my patrol routes, and spent hours just watching the pines sway beneath me. But the woods were too quiet. No birdsong at dawn, no squirrels chasing each other up the trunks. Even the wind seemed to die off when the sun went down. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums makes you feel like you're underwater. The first strange thing happened on the fourth night. I was asleep in my bunk when I heard footsteps at the base of the tower. Slow, deliberate, crunching gravel. The sound of something bipedal, circling. I flicked on the exterior floodlights and grabbed my binoculars. Nothing. Just the edge of forest, and the empty footpath, winding back toward the trailhead. I radioed base. Probably a black bear. They said, or a poacher, I suggested. You'd hear an engine if it was a poacher. Don't stress it. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I hiked out to check the trail cameras. One had been knocked off its mount. Another, closer to a clearing, was smashed, like something had grabbed the lens and crushed it. The final one, positioned along a narrow game trail, was intact. I popped out the SD card and brought it back to the tower. Later that afternoon, I loaded the images onto the laptop. Deer, elk, a black bear sniffing a tree. Then, on the final few frames, something tall, out of focus, covered in dark, matted hair. Just a silhouette, but it was walking upright, and it was looking directly at the camera. I zoomed in, but the image broke into pixels. Still, something about it chilled me. The way it stood with its shoulders hunched and arms too long, as if the bones were wrong underneath. Like something that had almost evolved right, but not quite. That night, I locked every hatch and window, and kept the light off. The next incident wasn't subtle. I was eating instant noodles when something slammed into the base of the tower. The entire structure shook. Then again, a second impact. This one harder. Like something was throwing its whole weight into the supports. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the perimeter. A boulder, easily the size of a cinder block, was lying at the bottom of the stairs. Not a natural fall. It had been thrown. Something roared from the tree line. Not a bear growl. Not a cougar scream. It sounded human, almost, but not quite. A deep, guttural bellow, followed by a shrill, high-pitched scream, like a man being torn in half. I backed away from the window, and that's when I saw it. It was standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the spill of the floodlights. 8 feet tall, at least, covered in dark, filthy hair. Its eyes caught the light, amber and unblinking. It stepped forward, slowly, like it was testing me. Its chest was massive, arms hanging low. One hand was dragging what looked like an elk carcass. The smell hit me even from that distance. Rot, fur, and something else. Something wrong. It stared at the tower for a full minute. Then it screamed again and vanished into the trees. I radioed. Base. No one else is reporting anything unusual, came the reply. You're up high? Wind does weird things with sound. Check the weather, not the cryptids. One of them joked, but I knew what I saw. Over the next few nights, the creature came back, always after midnight, always watching. Sometimes it threw things, branches, rocks, once what looked like the partial remains of a goat. Once I found a pile of stacked stones on the trail. Another time, there were claw marks, deep and purposeful, carved into the tower's supports. It wasn't random, it was ritual, it was a warning. The final night was the worst. A storm had rolled in, wind howling through the trees like a choir of wolves. I was dozing in the dark when I heard something climbing the ladder. 1 step, 2, 3. I grabbed the flare gun and waited, heart pounding. Then a hand slammed against the hatch, huge, hairy fingers, ending in cracked nails. It pushed hard. The hinges creaked. I fired the flare. The light exploded into the dark. Like a second sun, I caught a glimpse of its face. Not quite ape, not quite human. The skin beneath the fur was gray and weathered. The mouth was open, lips pulled back into a twisted grin full of yellow, flat teeth. It wasn't just climbing, it was enjoying it. The flare hit it in the shoulder. It screamed, not in pain, but rage. Then it dropped, silence, followed by the crashing of limbs as it thundered into the woods. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just waited for sunrise. I requested evacuation the next morning. They found the hatch dented, claw marks on the railings, but no prints, no video, nothing that couldn't be explained away as weather damage. They didn't believe me, but I know what I saw. I quit the forest service that week, moved to a small town in Arizona. Concrete traffic, noise, people, and yet, sometimes, when I hike the outskirts of town, I still get that feeling, the silence, the watching dot. And once, just once, I found a stone on my doorstep, stacked on another, just two, but enough to make me pack a bag and leave. Some things don't stay in the woods. They remember you, and they wait. I was 24 when I agreed to house a set for my Uncle Wade. He owned a hunting cabin way up north in Idaho, tucked into a stretch of wilderness known locally as Devil's Spine Ridge. Even saying the name felt wrong, like something sour in your mouth. But Wade was paying me to stay for a week, keep the generator running, and make sure no one broke in. Sounded easy. I figured I'd get some peace, maybe finish my sketchbook. I had no idea what I was walking into, what I saw in those woods. I still can't explain. But it changed me, and it convinced me that Bigfoot isn't just a myth, it's something real, and it isn't friendly. My uncle's cabin sat about 20 miles from the nearest paved road. I had to take an old logging route through thick pine forest to reach it. The trees were so tall, so close together, they blocked out the sun even during midday. The locals said compasses spun wild out there. No GPS, no cell service. The cabin itself looked like something out of a hunting magazine. Log walls, tin roof, a fire pit out back, and a shed filled with game traps. There were animal skulls nailed to the porch posts. Wade was always into that kind of thing. The first 2 days were quiet. Too quiet. Now that I think about it, no birds, no squirrels, not even bugs, just wind and the deep groaning of the trees. On the third day, I found something that made my skin crawl. I was hiking a trail behind the cabin when I saw it. A tree, stripped of its bark 12 feet up. Not claw marks, peeled, almost surgically. Around the base were bones. Deer, I think, but picked clean, arranged in a spiral. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about how high those scratches were. What could reach that high, and why? The next morning I saw the footprints, massive, deep, way, too big to be human, and barefoot, in the snow. I followed them for about 50 yards, until they vanished into a thicket. Just stopped. No retreat, no drag marks. Like whatever made them stepped out of this world and into another. That night, I heard it. A low chest, rattling howl. Not a wolf, not a bear. It echoed off the trees and bounced inside my skull. Long, drawn out, filled with something that sounded like sorrow or hunger. Maybe both. I stayed up with a rifle across my lap and the fire roaring. But the firewood was low. I had to go outside. I made it 10 feet off the porch before I froze. There, across the clearing, something was standing, just beyond the tree line. It was huge, hair like wet moss, shoulders broad enough to block out the moonlight. It didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. I backed into the cabin and bolted the door. An hour later, it screamed, a human scream, high-pitched, trembling like someone being torn open. And it didn't come from the woods. It came from behind the shed. The next morning, I found handprints on the back windows. Not fingerprints, palm prints, wide, flat, Hair stuck to the edges, and the window was cracked, like something massive had leaned against it, peered inside. I thought about leaving, but I couldn't. No cell service, remember? And the truck's fuel line had been chewed clean through. That was the first time I realized whatever was out there didn't just want to scare me. It wanted me to stay. It wanted me alone. On day 5, things escalated. I was boiling water for coffee when I noticed the smell, like dead animals and wet hair. Then something slammed against the wall, hard. I grabbed the rifle and ran outside, heart hammering. The side of the cabin was covered in mud, but not thrown, smeared. Huge handprints in a zigzag, like it was drawing something. A symbol, maybe. That night, I moved the mattress in front of the door and slept with the rifle clutched to my chest. I dreamed of the thing, of its eyes, black and bottomless, and its grin, wider than a man's. Too many teeth. The final night. The generator died around midnight. The silence was suffocating. Then came the tapping, first on the window, then on the walls, then the roof, like it was circling. Testing. I held my breath. Didn't move, but it knew I was there. And then, it spoke. Not words exactly, but sounds, mimicking my voice. From outside, let me in please. Cold, out here. I dropped the rifle. My hands were shaking too hard to aim. Then, came the scream again, right outside the door. I swear, it rattled the nails in the walls. I waited, shaking, until dawn. When the sun rose, I opened the door. The clearing was filled with footprints, circling, leading into the woods. And in the snow, right on the threshold, were 2 things. My keys, and my phone, both missing since day 1. Like it wanted me to know. It could have ended me any time, but it didn't. It wanted to play. I left the cabin that morning, walking 20 miles in the snow until I reached a ranger station. Took me 10 hours. I never went back. My uncle, he never returned either. Vanished that same winter while checking trail cameras. They found his truck, but no Wade. Only thing left behind was a single boot, full of blood and teeth marks that didn't match any animal. So yeah, I believe in Bigfoot, but not the gentle forest guardian you see in documentaries. This thing was no animal. It was something old, something cruel, something that enjoyed the fear. And if you're ever alone in the woods and hear something that screams like a man, run, because it ISNs single quotes, and it knows your name. When I was 31, I took a forestry job in a place the locals called Raven's Hollow. It was in Washington State. Real dense wilderness, high elevation, and completely off-grid. I signed a 3-month contract to do wildfire risk assessments on old, growth logging sites. Sounded like decent pay and solitude. I didn't realize it would nearly kill me. I went up there alone with the government, issued radio, my gear, and a borrowed 4x4 that barely held a signal long enough to say goodbye. They dropped me at an old ranger station, built sometime in the 60s. Cabin, water tank, outhouse, no backup, no partner, no one, for 50 miles. It was day 4 when I realized something was wrong. It started small, but it ended with blood, and something staring at me through the trees. There's a certain silence in old forests that you don't hear anywhere else. Not peace, pressure. Like the whole place is holding its breath. I noticed it the first morning I hiked the West Trail. There weren't any birds. Not one, not even bugs. Just wind groaning through the firs. I told myself it was just altitude, maybe weather. But that night, I heard footsteps around the cabin. Slow, deliberate. I opened the door and flashed my light. Nothing, but I smelled it. Wet earth and old meat. Like something had been sleeping in a pile of guts. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I found prints in the mud behind the outhouse. Huge, barefoot, long toes that spread like a primate's but heavier and deeper than any man could leave. They circled the station, then vanished uphill into the trees. I called the ranger district on my radio. Just static. That evening, I made a fire in the pit out back and sat with my rifle. Kept telling myself it was a bear, a freak-sized grizzly, something that just got too close. Then I heard the knock, a single sharp knock on the tree line, then another, further away, then two more, behind me. Wood knocking is how Bigfoot researchers claim the creatures communicate. At the time, I didn't believe in that crap. Now I know better. Night 3, I woke to a sound like weeping, right outside the window, but it wasn't a person. It was too guttural, too wrong, like something was pretending to cry, trying to sound human. I stayed under the blanket with my rifle until morning. When I stepped outside, I found a fresh pile of deer bones on the porch, skull included. No flesh, just red, clean, picked bones, laid out in a perfect circle. Day 5. I tried to hike back toward the service road. It should have been a 10-mile trip. It took me nearly 16, and when I reached the road, my truck was gone. Not stolen. Gone. No tracks. No sign of it ever being there, like the forest had swallowed it. That's when the panic started to set in. I hiked back with my GPS, but the trail kept looping. I was going in circles. Trees that should have been east were suddenly west. Patches of moss were identical to places I had already passed. I started seeing structures, sticks leaned in triangle, shapes, tree trunks bent into arches. One had bones woven into the lattice, not human, but close. That night, I heard breathing through the walls, slow, deep, wet. It walked around the cabin for hours. I could hear it sniffing, brushing its hand, or whatever it had, against the wood slats. At one point it crouched near the window, and I swear, I saw the top of its head through the glass. It was squatting, and it still came up halfway up the pane. I didn't move, didn't blink, just waited until sunrise. On the 7th day, I found a man, or what was left of one. He was hanging 20 feet off the ground in a pine tree, naked skin torn open like he'd been clawed by a machine. His legs were missing below the knee, jaw unhinged like it had been pulled apart. Around the base of the tree, there were more footprints, not from the man, from something much bigger, and across the bark, claw marks. High up, deep, I took a photo, just one. Then I ran. The final night, it came inside. I don't know how. I had locked every door, bolted the shutters, but I woke up to the sound of breathing in the room, not beside the bed. Above it, I rolled over, real slow, and saw it, pressed to the ceiling like a spider, arms outstretched, eyes black as coal, mouth hanging open, teeth so long they curled at the tips. The body was thick with hair, matted with blood and pine needles, and it smiled. It dropped to the floor with a crack, and I bolted out the door, barefoot, into the woods. Didn't stop running until the sun came up. Didn't sleep again until I was back in the nearest town a day later, covered in cuts, dehydrated, and half insane. They found the ranger station weeks later. It had been destroyed, ripped open from the outside, furniture shredded, blood on the floor, but no bodies, no bones, and no tracks. Just one message, scrawled across the wall in burnt charcoal. You were seen. I quit forestry. I live in the city now. But sometimes, when I hear tapping on my window at night, I think of Raven's Hollow, and the thing that smiled down from the ceiling. It didn't want food. It wanted me to know it was there, that it had always been watching, and that it's not alone. One night something happened which I cannot forget. Something that still echoes in my bones whenever I hear the wind through the trees. I was a search and rescue volunteer in northern Idaho, covering the Bitterroot Range. It's beautiful country. Untouched, wild, and deadly if you take one wrong step. People go missing up there more than you'd think, and they usually blame the terrain. Avalanches, mountain lions, falls, but not all of them are. Accidents, some of them vanish because of what lives in those woods. And I saw it, I heard it, and I barely made it out alive. It was October when the call came in. A hunter named Wesley Drayton had gone missing near a place we called Dead Elk Ridge, named after a local legend of a herd of elk that all ran off a cliff in the 80s. No one knew why, just bones and blood, piled like trash at the bottom. Wesley had been solo, young guy, only 24. He texted his girlfriend around 3 p.m., saying he was tracking something big. That was the last anyone heard from him. We mobilized by 5 p.m. I went out with my partner Jenny. We took ATVs up the logging road, then hiked the rest by foot with headlamps and radios. It got dark fast and silent. We made it to Wesley's camp around 8:30. Tent still there. Fire pit cold. But something was off. No backpack, no weapon. And the ground was disturbed. Not just footprints, drag marks. As if something had pulled him away by the legs. You could see his boots scuffed into the earth, heels first. Jenny swore and keyed the radio. Base, this is Bravo team. We've got possible signs of struggle. Send backup. But all we got was static. We followed the drag trail for maybe a mile. It veered off sharply down into a gully, where the forest got thick. Old pines, moss-like carpet, and the smell, wet fur and rot. The kind of scent that makes your body remember death before your brain can process it. That's when we heard the howl. Low, long, almost like a scream wrapped in a growl. It echoed through the trees in a way that made me stop cold. Jenny whispered, "That's not a wolf." No, it wasn't, because wolves don't make the ground vibrate. We pressed on. At the bottom of the ravine, we found what I can only call a den. A hollow under a massive fallen tree, surrounded by bones. Deer, mostly. Some elk. A bear skull, all picked clean. Arranged in circles, like altars, and in the center, a torn piece of red flannel. Wesley's jacket. Then we heard the branches snapped from above us, then behind, and then to the side. We weren't alone. Jenny raised her flashlight, and it caught something in the trees. 2 eyes. Not glowing from reflection, glowing from within. They blinked and moved. The creature dropped from the branches like a sack of meat, 10 feet tall, covered in black hair, arms longer than a man's, fingers like roots. Its face, God, its face looked almost human until it opened its mouth. Rows of square teeth, like a horse, but sharper, yellow, and it made a sound I'll never forget. Not a roar, a chuckle, like it was enjoying this. We ran. No plan, no direction, just panic. It followed, fast and silent. I only saw glimpses as we tore through brush and thorns. A hand here, a leg. Once, I swear it ran along the trees, moving faster than anything on the ground. Jenny tripped, and I grabbed her, just in time to hear something massive crash behind us. She screamed. I turned. It was standing on 2 legs now, sniffing the air, smiling. That smile. It didn't want to kill us. Not yet. It wanted to hunt us. We eventually reached the old fire watchtower, one of the last ones still standing out there. Metal ladder, 40 feet up. We climbed it like hellhounds were on our heels. Once inside, we barricaded the hatch and tried the radio again. This time, it worked. Barely. We screamed coordinates and sent help until our throats gave out. Then we waited. Below us, the woods were still until they weren't. Around 2 a.m., it came back. We heard the steps, heavy and slow, circling the base of the tower. Then the laughing. It shook the whole frame, not growling, not yelling, laughing, mocking. Then it climbed. We heard the claws on the metal ladder. 1 rung. 2. We held the door shut with everything we had. Jenny was crying. I was ready to shoot myself before I let that thing in. Then, gunshots. Voices. Search party had arrived. The thing let out one last howl and leaped off the side like a shadow disappearing into night. They found us alive. Wesley's body was never recovered. Only his boots, nailed to a tree 3 miles from camp, 20 feet off the ground. That was the last search and rescue I ever did. I moved states, took an office job. Don't even hike anymore. But sometimes, at night, when I'm alone, I hear laughing in the trees outside, and I know it's still out there, waiting, because once it marks you, you're never really free. It doesn't forget, it just watches and waits. When I was 17, I took a summer job at a Christian youth camp in northern Washington, right near the Cascade foothills. The kind of place with no cell service, 1 landline, and a mile-long gravel drive just to get to the main lodge. It was supposed to be wholesome. It wasn't. I still dream about that thing behind cabin 8, and how it watched us, waited, and how it almost got me. The camp was called Clearbrook Pines. Tucked so deep in the forest, you could hear trees shift like whispers at night. I was assigned as a junior counselor, basically unpaid labor. We had 13 cabins, a mess hall, and an old boathouse by the lake that no one used anymore. My group of campers got cabin 8, which sat furthest from the others, right near the tree line. From the first night, I didn't like it. It wasn't the kids. They were great. It was the stillness. No bugs, no bird song, no raccoons in the trash. Just this dead air outside that made it feel like the forest was holding its breath. One of the boys, Luke, kept saying, "There's a man in the woods." I told him it was probably a deer, or a bear, or shadows. He said, "It walks like a person, but it's not." The third night, I stayed up late reading by lantern while the kids slept. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard thumping. Not footsteps, more like a weight shifting just beyond the back wall of the cabin. I crept to the rear window and looked out. Nothing, but then the motion light on the mess hall kicked on. About 150 feet away, something huge moved between the trees. I saw a glimpse, just a shoulder, covered in matted black fur, vanishing into the dark dot. No sound, no footsteps, just gone. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to spook the kids or lose my job. But over the next few nights, weird things kept happening. Something pulled the firewood stack apart. One kid found a dead bird nailed to our cabin door. I found prints behind the latrine. Long, heavy, impressions with 5-toe, like marks, each as big as my palm. Another counselor, Cam, saw them too. He joked, "Sasquatch is real, bro." But when I laughed, he didn't. He was pale. Said he saw something once when he was little. Said he knew better than to go near it. The 6th night, I caught it staring. I was outside, dumping trash behind the mess hall around midnight. No moon that night, just pitch black. I heard twigs snap, turned slowly, and saw 2 red eyes in the trees, about 8 feet off the ground. They weren't reflecting. They were glowing. The silhouette stepped forward, and I dropped the trash bags. It was tall, broad, covered in fur, but wrong, like a man who'd been twisted. One arm hung longer than the other. Its chest moved with slow, measured breathing. It didn't charge, it just watched, like it knew it didn't have to rush. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I went to the camp director, told him everything. He sighed and pulled a metal thermos from his drawer. "Every year around this time," he said, Something comes down from the ridge. I stared. You knew. He nodded, said it never hurt anyone, as long as we stayed respectful. Don't wander, don't whistle, and never leave food out after dark. I asked why no one warned us. He said, if I told you, would you have come? That night, I made every kid sleep with a whistle and flashlight under their pillow. I stayed up on the porch. 2:17 a.m. The motion light clicked on again, then went out, then on again. Something was circling cabin 8. I held my breath and leaned out. I saw it step up to the trees, barely 20 feet away. It reached out and placed a hand against the cabin wall, 5 fingers, all crooked, like it had broken and healed wrong. Then it turned its head and looked right at me. The air went cold. My legs locked. It didn't run. It didn't scream. It grinned. That wide, expressionless stretch of lips over dull teeth. Then it walked backward into the trees. The last night of camp, Luke went missing. We found his whistle just outside the latrine. No prints, no signs of struggle. Just silence. We searched until dawn. Then, as the sun rose, we found him sleeping, unharmed. In the old boathouse, he said, it carried me here. It told me you were watching, so it couldn't take me all the way. I asked him what it looked like. He said, like a man in a bear suit, but bigger and sad. I never went back. They shut the camp down the following year, citing financial strain. But I know the truth, and I never walk near woods after dark anymore, especially near cabins, because sometimes the dark has eyes, and it's waiting for you to blink. One night something happened which I cannot forget, even though I've tried for years. It was in October of 2013, when I was living in a small town outside Missoula, Montana. I was working part-time as a surveyor's assistant for the county, mostly helping map out forest easements and trail systems near logging roads. I'd only been on the job a couple months when they sent me to a remote stretch of forest near the Bitter Roots. Just me, a compass, a radio, and a topographical map, and something that screamed like it was dying just beyond the tree line. I'd driven in that morning, bumping down an old logging trail in my beat, up Tacoma, planning to do a 3-day loop and camp out along the way. My boss didn't like paying for hotels, said it was good for us to rough it, but there was something strange about that stretch of forest. You could feel it in your skin. It was cold, colder than it should have been. No wind, no birds, and a wall of fog that sat just inside the tree line, unmoving, thick like soup. I should have turned around right then, but I didn't. That night, I set up camp about 10 miles in just a tent and a fire ring near a dry creek bed. The fog hadn't lifted. If anything, it was creeping closer. I kept checking the barometer, thinking a storm was rolling in, but the pressure was steady. Around 1 a.m., I heard something out in the dark, a cracking sound, like a tree being snapped, then a scream. Not a mountain lion, not a bear dot. It was long, low at first, then rising into this inhuman wail that shook my tent poles. I sat there with my hand on the zipper. Frozen dot, then something passed by my tent, slow, heavy, the sound of breathing, deep, rhythmic, and foul, like dead leaves and old meat. I didn't sleep. The next morning I found prints in the frost. Not bear, not human. They were elongated, wide, and flat-footed, with toe impressions as thick as sausages, at least 16 inches long. Whatever made them walked upright, and it had circled my camp 3 times. I packed up immediately, hiked off course, directly toward the service road, but the fog wouldn't let me leave. Every ridge I climbed dropped me back into the same low basin. I tried to use my compass, but the needle spun every time I crossed a certain rock outcrop, like the air was charged, or the forest itself was playing tricks. By nightfall, I was back at the dry creek bed, back where I started. I set no fire that night. just huddled inside my tent with my multi-tool and flashlight. The fog pressed so close, I couldn't see more than a few feet. That's when I heard the whistling. At first, I thought it was wind, but it wasn't. It was 3 tones, rising in a pattern, almost like a signal, then a pause, then a mimic. The same 3 tones, but from a different spot in the woods, closer. They did this for hours, back and forth, until I was surrounded by whistles in every direction. That was when I heard the breathing again. Outside my tent, closer this time, then a shadow fell across the fabric, huge, misshapen. I saw the outline of a hand splayed, dragging claws or nails across the nylon. It didn't press, didn't attack, just touched, like it was trying to understand what I was. I held my breath until dawn. When the sun rose, the fog finally began to lift, and I saw it across the creek bed, maybe 20 yards away, standing half behind a cedar tree, tall, covered in thick black hair, shoulders like a linebacker, arms longer than any person's. It stood still, watching, and in its hand, it held something. My radio. It had pulled it out of my pack and was pressing buttons, raising it to its head like it was imitating me. Then it whistled. 3 tones. Identical. I backed away slowly, never turning, until I reached a slope and slid down into the forest below. Didn't stop until I reached the highway. Didn't go back for my gear. I filed my report with the county, but they ignored the details. Told me I probably got turned around. Imagined the rest. Fog does weird things to the mind, they said. I quit the next week. Moved back to town, but I still hear the 3 whistles sometimes, in dreams, or outside my window when the air is heavy with fog. I never go back to those woods, because I don't think it wanted to hurt me. I think it wanted to learn me, and if I'd stayed one more night, I think it would have tried to become me. When I was young, I thought monsters were just stories, but the summer I turned 19, I learned some stories are warnings. That summer, I took a job working firewatch in a remote section of the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. I was stationed in a steel-framed tower perched above a place locals called Rattlesnake Gulch, a thick tangle of pine, aspen, and ancient boulders that locals avoided without saying why. I thought they were just superstitious. They weren't. I arrived in late June with a backpack full of books, a radio, and a Winchester I didn't know how to use. My nearest neighbor was 15 miles down the service road, and cell service was non-existent. But I was used to isolation. I thought it'd be peaceful. That was before I heard the screaming. It started on my 3rd night. I was logging lightning strikes in the eastern range when I heard something deep down in the gulch. At first I thought it was a coyote, but the scream didn't end like a coyote. It rose, got louder, angrier, then turned into this shuddering groan that vibrated the metal floor. Beneath my boots, it wasn't animal, it wasn't human either. It sounded like both. The next morning, I hiked the south ridge to investigate. Found trees snapped in half like matchsticks. Huge tracks, longer than my boot, deep, set in the moss, as if something weighed several hundred pounds. I followed them until they just stopped, in the middle of a clearing. No scat, no fur, number, sign of struggle, just disappearance. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing wood knocks in the distance. 3, then silence, then another set, closer, and then something started climbing the tower. It was slow, deliberate. 1 step at a time. I grabbed the Winchester and aimed toward the stairwell, shaking so hard the barrel clanged on the window frame. I shouted, warned whoever it was, but there was no voice. Just that same scream, this time right below me, so loud it hurt my ears. I fell back, covering my head. When I finally dared peek out, nothing, just the night, and one enormous handprint on the glass, too wide to be a man's, too long, and covered in dark grime that smelled like dead bark and rust. The forest rangers said, I imagined it, that the altitude was messing with my perception. But one of the older rangers, Jeffrey, took me aside later. You weren't the first, he said. We lose someone up there every 5-6 years. Some don't come back. Others come back, wrong. I asked what he meant. He just looked at me and said, they call it the screamer. A week later, it got worse. At night, I could hear it mocking me, repeating phrases I'd said on the radio. Unit 14, copy, checking, over and over in a warped, wet, throated mimicry, like a parrot that had been dead a long time. One night, I woke up to see it standing in the clearing below the tower, staring up. It was massive, 8, maybe 9 feet tall, shoulders broad as a doorframe, hair matted and thick. It didn't move, just stood there for an hour, swaying slightly. Then it screamed again, and I blacked out. When I came to, it was dawn. The window was shattered. My rifle was gone, and carved into the side of the tower in deep gouges. Go back I packed that day. Hiked down the mountain without telling a soul. The forest was silent the whole way. Too silent, no birds, no squirrels, not even insects, just a thick, pressing quiet that felt like it was trying to smother my thoughts. I didn't tell anyone the full story until years later. Most still don't believe me. But sometimes, when I hike too deep into a quiet forest, I hear wood knocks, 3 of them, then silence, and the feeling that something is waiting, just out of sight, listening, learning. One night something happened which I cannot forget. I was 23 and working as a wildlife biology assistant in northern Washington, helping document bat colonies and cave species near the Olympic foothills. One location stood out, Devil's Back Ridge, an isolated stretch of pine-covered mountain with jagged cliffs and a reputation among locals. The map showed a cave there, partially collapsed, but still marked. That was our next site to survey. My partner, Red, and I hiked in with climbing gear and enough food for 3 days. We should have never gone inside from the start. The ridge gave off a bad feeling. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the smell, earthy rot and ammonia, like something dead soaked into the dirt. Reed joked that maybe Bigfoot was using the place as a bathroom. I didn't laugh. We found the cave mouth by late afternoon, just under a split in the cliff. The entrance was narrow, but widened as we squeezed through. Inside, the air was cold, too cold for summer, and the walls were coated in a slick, black fungus I'd never seen before. No bats, no insects, nothing alive, just silence, and the overwhelming feeling that we were being watched. We marked our entry and set up lights deeper in. About 200 feet in, the floor sloped downward sharply, like a throat swallowing us whole. I remember thinking the cave felt wrong, not naturally formed, more like it had been carved. Then we found the bones, dozens of them, deer, elk, some smaller animals, all clean, piled in corners like trash. Reed started to take photos. I kept my flashlight steady, and that's when I noticed it. Footprints. Huge, bare, with 5 distinct toes and a long mid-foot arch. Reed, I whispered, we're not alone down here. He shrugged, maybe a bear. Then we heard the breathing. It was a wet, congested sound, raspy, like something with massive lungs pulling slow, patient breaths through phlegm, and it was close. We turned off our lights. The breathing stopped. Then we heard a gravel shift, something heavy moving in the dark. My blood turned cold. Then something growled, a low throaty rumble that didn't sound like any animal I knew. It vibrated in my ribs, made my knees want to buckle. Reed flicked on his flashlight. The beam caught a glimpse. Just a flash, but enough. A towering shape hunched beneath the ceiling, thick black fur, eyes that glowed like coals, a mouth open and full of flat, yellow teeth, and it charged. We ran, scrambled, slipped, fell, got back up. The thing howled behind us, but I never looked back. When we burst into daylight, it stopped, just inside the mouth of the cave, standing, watching. It didn't follow us out, just stood, in the shadows, breathing, crouched like it was too big for the world above. Reed and I didn't speak until we were back at camp. We hiked out that night, ignoring protocol, abandoning equipment. I filed a report under unstable cave, dangerous air quality. It was a lie. Weeks later, Reed quit the field entirely. He wouldn't explain, just said, "There's things under the ground that don't want us there." As for me, I still work outdoors, still hike, but I avoid caves, especially ones near Devil's Back Ridge, because I saw what lives in that darkness, and I know it. Let us go. Not because we escaped, because it wanted us to tell people, to warn them, to stay out of its home. When I was young, my grandfather told me not to cross Cold River after dark. He used to say, if you hear the whistling on the water, don't look up, just walk faster and don't stop. As a kid, I thought he was just trying to scare me. It wasn't until the fall I turned 25 that I realized he wasn't telling a story. He was giving me a warning. That was the year I came back home to take care of him after a stroke. He lived in a small cabin near the Cold River Bridge, an old wooden overpass barely strong enough for a pickup. The area was remote, dense woods, no streetlights, and fog that moved like it had a mind of its own. Grandpa couldn't talk much after the stroke, but every time the sun went down, he'd point to the front door, then shake his head slowly, every single night. It didn't mean much, until the thing started visiting. The first night it came, I thought it was just a raccoon. Something thumped on the side of the house near midnight. Then came a dragging sound, like nails scraping along the wall. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch, expecting to scare off some animal. But the woods were dead silent. No crickets, no owls, no wind, and just beyond the edge of the trees, something moved. It was tall, too tall. Its silhouette was like a man wrapped in animal fur, except it didn't move like a man. It slunk, low and slow, arms longer than they should have been, and it was whistling, a low, wavering tune, like a breath through broken teeth. I backed inside and locked the door. My grandfather, pale as paper, was staring out the window, his lips quivering. He tapped his fingers against the armrest slowly, rhythmically, like a countdown dot that was night 1. Over the next week, it came back every night, always between midnight and 1, always the same whistle. Sometimes it circled the house. Sometimes it just stood beneath the window. One night I looked out with binoculars. It was watching me. Its face wasn't human. Broad, flat nose, sunken black eyes that didn't reflect light. A long mouth that curled in a smile without lips. It was Bigfoot, but wrong. Something else inside that shape. It knew what windows were. It knew what fear smelled like. I tried to call the sheriff. Phone lines were down. My cell wouldn't get a signal past sunset. I tried to drive out during the day, but the road near the bridge was blocked. An oak tree across the dirt path that hadn't been there before. And the deeper I got into the woods trying to go around it, the more I saw the signs. Trees stripped of bark 8 feet up, piles of animal bones arranged in spirals, footprints bigger than a dinner plate. I turned back. The worst night was the 8th. It knocked. 3 slow knocks on the front door. I didn't answer. It knocked again, harder this time. Then it laughed. A short hoarse chuckle like someone mimicking a sound they'd heard once. Grandpa tried to stand, tried to reach me. His eyes were wide with terror, and he mouthed one word over and over. Bridge, bridge. I finally understood. He wasn't afraid of the thing itself. He was afraid of what it crossed to get here. The Cold River Bridge. I grabbed a flare, a jug of gasoline, and the old .308 rifle he kept in the closet. That night, just before sundown, I walked down to the bridge. It was already there, waiting in the fog. Its body was too big, shoulders too wide, arms swung low, like a gorilla's, but it stood upright. Its chest heaved with deep breaths, and its skin looked like rotted leather under the fur. When I stepped onto the bridge, it didn't move. I lit the flare. "I'm not letting you come across again," I said. My voice cracked. It took one step forward. I raised the rifle and fired. The bullet hit its shoulder, and it screamed, not like an animal, like a person being burned alive. It lunged. I threw the flare and the gas together. The bridge lit up like a funeral pyre. The thing stumbled, howling, trying to swat the fire off its fur. Then it fell through the planks, straight down into the black water. I stood there shaking, watching until the bridge collapsed into flames and the thing was gone. It never came back after that. Grandpa passed away a few months later, peacefully, quietly. I moved back to the city, thinking I could forget what I saw, but I can't, because sometimes, on stormy nights, I wake up and hear that whistle far away, just faint enough to beat out. But I remember what he told me, and I still don't go near rivers after dark, because some things don't need a bridge to cross over. Some things just wait. One night something happened, which I cannot forget. It was in the fall of 2009, just after my Uncle Dean passed and left us his old farm in Tennessee. The place had been falling apart for years, half-rotted fence lines, an overgrown field, and a barn that leaned like it wanted to lie down and die. I was 28 then, between jobs and freshly divorced, so I offered to help my cousin Andy clean the place up. Figured I'd stay a couple of weeks, knock the dust off, get my head right. Andy lived in town and only visited the farm now and then, but he warned me about one thing before I moved in. "Don't mess with the woodpile behind the barn," he said. "Just leave it alone." That was all he said. At the time I thought he was messing with me, or maybe just being superstitious. I wish I'd listened. The house was livable. Barely. No internet, no TV, just a landline and a stack of old books. I spent most of the days clearing brush, fixing fence posts, and trying to get the generator to stop leaking oil. Nights were quiet, too quiet, no wind, no crickets, and always that feeling like something was watching from the tree line. It started, the second night, around 3 a.m. I woke up because I thought someone knocked on the side of the house. Not at the door, the wall. A heavy thud, followed by silence. Then another knock, slower, closer to the bedroom. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside with a bat in my hand. No one there, but the air smelled wrong, thick, like animal musk and damp earth. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was near, even though I couldn't see it. Then I noticed something odd. The woodpile behind the barn. It had moved. It was closer than before, just by a few feet, but I was sure of it. I figured maybe I was mistaken, and went back to bed, but I kept hearing the knocks every night. A few days later, I called Andy. "Hey," I said, "what's the deal with that woodpile? You told me to leave it alone." He went quiet. Then he said, "You've been hearing knocks." "Yeah, and the pile, it's moving, isn't it?" I hesitated. Yeah, he sighed. Okay, listen, Uncle Dean used to say there was something that lived in those woods. He called it the Watcher. Said it used to stay out near the hills. But when the logging started 10 years ago, it moved closer, right up to the barn. What does that have to do with the woodpile? That's where it hides, he said. During the day, if you touch the woodpile, it knows. It gets braver, bolder. I didn't believe him, not really. Not until 2 nights later. That was the night I looked out the window and saw the woodpile right outside. The house, it had moved nearly 50 yards in one day. I hadn't touched it, but it had moved. I went outside to check, heart hammering, and behind the stack of split logs, I saw tracks. Bare footprints. Huge, easily 20 inches long, with claw-like toes. The prints led from the woods, circled the house, and stopped right at the window where I slept. That night, I locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, and kept the light on. At 3:27 a.m., I heard it. Not a knock this time, a whisper. Right at the window. I see you. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I packed my bags the next morning. I didn't care what Andy said. I was done. But when I tried to drive out, the truck wouldn't start. The engine cranked, coughed, and died. I popped the hood. Something had torn out the spark plug wires and shoved dead mice into the engine block. I ran back inside and called Andy. He came out 2 hours later with a shotgun and a can of kerosene. I told you not to touch the pile, he said. I didn't. He stared at the logs, now nearly pressed against the front steps. You stayed too long, he whispered. Then he dumped the kerosene over the pile and lit a match. The flames roared, up fast, and then we heard it, a scream, from inside the fire. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was both. Something in agony, something furious. The fire burned for almost an hour. When it finally died, the pile was gone, and so were the tracks. We didn't sleep that night. Andy sat on the porch with the shotgun across his lap. I sat inside, watching the woods, heart hammering. Nothing came. At dawn, he turned to me and said, "We bought time, that's all." I left the farm that morning. Andy sold it 6 months later, after something scratched a message into the barn wall. Not done yet. It's been years since I've been back, but every so often, I check the real estate listings. The place has changed hands 4 times in 10 years. Never stays sold for long. People say it's haunted. Say there's something that watches from the trees. A shape, a whisper, a presence just beyond the edge of the light. I don't know if it's Bigfoot. I just know it wears the shape of something we once called an animal, and it never forgets who burned its home. When I was 19, something happened to me that changed the way I look at the woods forever. It was the summer of 2011. I was working as a park maintenance temp at a state-run trail system near Devil's Elbow, Missouri, a twisted stretch of land full of limestone cliffs, old riverbeds, and thick, ancient trees that swallowed the sun even at noon. We weren't exactly a tourist destination. A couple of locals came through to fish or hike, but mostly it was just me, a beat-up John Deere cart, and a toolkit for fixing busted railings and picking up beer cans. Most people didn't stick around past dusk, and I found out real quick. There was a reason for that. It started with the sounds. On my 3rd week, I pulled a late shift, cleaning graffiti off a bridge out by the Devil's Elbow overlook. The sun had dipped just low enough to bleed orange through the trees, and I had maybe 20 minutes of light left. That's when I heard it. A scream. But not just any scream. It was deep and guttural, like a bear caught in a trap, mixed with a human cry for help. I froze mid-scrub. The sound came from the woods downhill, near the dry riverbed. Then it came again, this time closer. I told myself it was just a bobcat, or maybe a wild hog, but I'd heard those before. This wasn't that. This was something bigger. I should have left right then, but I was young, dumb, and curious. I climbed down from the bridge and followed the sound, deeper into the underbrush. My flashlight barely cut through the gathering dark. I walked maybe 200 feet when I found a clearing, and in the center of it, a deer carcass. But it wasn't just dead. It was destroyed, torn open at the belly, ribs cracked, spine bent, backward like it had been twisted. The head was missing entirely, just gone. The blood was still warm. I turned to leave, heart thundering, when I heard breathing, heavy, wet, labored, from the trees behind me. I whipped the flashlight around. Nothing, but the brush moved, and I caught just a glimpse, a leg, a massive fur-covered leg with a bent, backward knee. Then the scream came again, and I ran. I didn't go back for 2 days. When I finally did, the carcass was gone. No blood, no bones, like it had never been there. I reported it to my supervisor, and he shrugged it off. "You heard the screamer," he said, like it was a joke. "She's been around here longer than us. Just don't be in her woods after dark." He wasn't kidding. Over the next few weeks, more signs appeared. Trees torn open 10 feet off the ground, footprints the size of dinner plates near trail markers, and always that scream, just after sundown. Then came the hiker, middle-aged guy, out-of-towner, supposed to do the short loop and be back by 5. He never came back. Search and rescue went out that night. I tagged along, figuring I knew the trails better than most. We found his backpack snagged in a tree, 12 feet off the ground. Found one of his boots, too, still tied, still clean, like he'd been lifted right out of it. Then we found blood. Not a lot, just a smear on a rock, like a nosebleed. No trail, no body, and something else, a handprint, pressed into the mud, twice the size of mine, but only 4 fingers. No thumb. That was when I started carrying a weapon. Not a park-issued one. My dad's old .357. It never made me feel safer. The final straw came 2 nights before I quit. I was driving the cart back toward the ranger station after closing the main gate. Headlights on, music low. Then I saw it. Something moving just outside the beams. I slowed, and it stepped into the light. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something between 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Matted dark fur, long arms that dangled past the knees. The face was the worst part. Not a snout, not human, just flat, with deep, set eyes and no nose. Just 2 slits and a wide, cracked mouth, and the eyes. They glowed yellow like burning coal. It stared at me, then let out that scream, the same one from weeks before. I floored the cart, did 60, all the way back to the station, parked it sideways, and ran inside like a madman. Nobody believed me, but I knew what I saw. I'd quit 2 days later, left my gear in a pile, and never went back. Since then, I've read stories from others, hunters, campers, hikers, who all say the same thing. Something walks those woods at Devil's Elbow. Something that doesn't want to be seen, but wants you to hear it, because once you've heard the screamer, it never really leaves you. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed with the fan off and the window open, I hear it. Just a whisper, far away, but it's getting closer. One night something happened, which I cannot forget, no matter how much I drink, sleep, or pray. It was February 2019. I was a volunteer with a search and rescue group in Oregon, just outside a place known locally as Raven's Gorge. Not many maps show it by name, but ask any hunter in Douglas County and they'll tell you where it is. The terrain out there is brutal. Steep ridges, slick moss, heavy timber, and an unnatural cold that creeps into your bones. Even when the rest of Oregon thaws out, Raven's Gorge stays frozen. That's why when a hiker went missing up there, some guy from Idaho who thought winter hiking was peaceful, we figured it was just exposure. Maybe he got lost, fell, and froze. We were wrong, so damn wrong. The first sign was the trail, not his, something else's. The guy had checked in at the trailhead 3 days prior, according to a scribbled logbook entry, a solo hike. No GPS beacon, just a phone and paper map. Idiotic, considering the terrain. We found the remnants of his camp on day 2 of the search. A small tent half collapsed under ice, boots outside frozen solid, and his phone cracked and dead. Wedged into the snow like he'd dropped it while running, but there were no footprints around the camp. None, not even his own, just tracks that led in from the woods. Enormous tracks, 18 inches long at least, sunken deep, far too deep for snowshoes or boots. The stride was massive, 6 to 7 feet apart, and the shape was wrong, like a man's, but broader, with toes that splayed wide in a strange arch like a gorilla's foot. I snapped photos. One of the other guys joked, "Guess Bigfoot got hungry," but none of us laughed, because the prince circled the tent and then vanished that night. We camped at the trailhead. I couldn't sleep. The wind made the trees groan like something alive. Around 3 a.m., I stepped out of the tent to take a piss and froze mid-step. There was a figure standing down the trail. No flashlight, no gear, just a silhouette in the snow, too tall and too still. At first I thought it was a tree, but then it shifted, just enough to confirm it was watching me. I stepped backward toward the tent. My boots crunched. That thing didn't move, didn't make a sound. I blinked, and it was gone. Just like that, we radioed in for more help the next morning, but the higher-ups told us to stand down. Weather was moving in. Too dangerous, they said. Translation. They didn't want another missing person, but I couldn't leave. Not after what I'd seen. Not without at least knowing, so I stayed behind while the others packed out. Just me, my pack, my Remington 870, and a stupid sense of duty. I hiked back to the abandoned campsite, following the same frozen trail. That's when I saw the claw marks on the trees, 12 feet up, gouged deep into the bark like something had used its hands to climb downward instead of up. More tracks appeared, deeper now, like it was pacing or agitated. They led downhill into a part of the gorge that had been closed off for years, blocked by rock slides and fallen trees. And down there, I heard it, a howl, but not like a wolf. This was basso so deep it shook my rib cage. Long, mournful, like something ancient calling out through time, and then, a second howl, closer. I ran, it followed. I never saw it clearly. Just shadows between the trunks, a flash of hair, the crunch of snow behind me. My lungs burned. My legs gave out 3 times. Each time I thought it would be on me, but it never was. It wanted me to run. It was hurting me, like prey. I broke the tree line just as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The last bit of light caught something standing back in the trees. Something huge, hunched, with a sloped head and eyes that glinted silver blue. I don't remember how I got in my truck. I just remember slamming the door, locking it, and driving all the way to Medford without stopping once. They found the hiker's body a week later, 90 feet up in a pine tree. No jacket, no shoes, just his shredded thermal underwear and a jawbone. In his lap, they ruled it death by exposure, followed by animal activity. BULLCRAP. No. Bear climbs trees and places your jawbone in your own lap like a trophy. No mountain lion makes footprints like that. No animal I've ever tracked or seen can howl like what I heard. I quit search and rescue that spring, sold my gear, left Oregon, but every now and then, when I close my eyes, I see the tree. I see that silhouette standing silent in the snow, and I hear that howl. The one that told me there's something in Raven's Gorge that doesn't care if we believe in it or not, because it believes in us, and it's always watching. When I was 17, I made a mistake that still haunts me to this day. It was the summer before senior year, and my uncle gave me a job helping him survey land in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. We were marking property lines for some investor from California who planned to build luxury cabins. The place was remote. No cell service, no real roads, just a logging trail that climbed up into dense pine and fir forests. We camped out for nearly a week. Just me, Uncle Ray, and his friend Bill. But I swear to you, it wasn't the terrain that tried to kill us. It was what lived there, something that watched from the trees, something that moved when we didn't. Day 2 started weird. We'd hiked about 4 miles up to place new boundary markers, and around midday I noticed the tree line looked off, too, still, almost like the trees were leaning inward, crowding the path behind us. I mentioned it to Ray. He gave me a look. "You feel it too?" he asked. I asked what he meant. Bill chimed in. "This part of the forest, it's wrong. Been wrong since the 60s. Locals call it the Gray Mile. Old stories, disappearances. But hey, money's money." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, the sounds of the forest stopped. No birds, no insects, just wind and our breathing. And then, around 3 a.m., we heard something move outside the tents. It wasn't footsteps, more like a low shuffle, like something massive dragging itself through the pine needles. Heavy breaths, not close but intentional, like it knew we were listening. Ray unzipped the tent flap just a little, rifle ready. "Jesus," he whispered. "Back up. Now." I didn't see it fully, just a flash of fur and a shape that blocked the moonlight. Taller than the tent, with arms too long and shoulders that didn't match a bear or a moose. Then it stood upright and walked away without a sound. In the morning, we found deep prints, barefoot, nearly 2 feet long, spaced 6 to 8 feet apart, as if it had circled us while we slept. Bill wanted to leave. Ray disagreed. "We finished the job," he said. "We stay sharp. No hero stuff." But none of us slept the next night. We kept hearing that low growl echo from the trees. Always just far enough away to question it. Always followed by a cracking sound, like tree limbs snapping under weight. I didn't want to admit it then, but I started seeing it too, the tree line shifting, inch by inch, like something massive was creeping just beyond the edge of sight. At dusk on day 4, Bill went to take a leak and didn't come back. We found his flashlight in the dirt, still on. His boots were there too, like he'd stepped right out of them. No blood, no drag marks, just footprints leading away, and then stopping, like he'd been lifted off the ground. Ray radioed for a chopper the next morning, but no one answered. We were too deep, too isolated, so we packed light and started down the mountain on foot. That's when the forest changed. The paths we'd marked were gone, trees in different places, rocks that shouldn't be there. I swear it was like the woods had rearranged themselves. We hiked in circles for 2 days. Each night we heard it breathing. Each night it came closer. At one point, I swear I saw it between the trees. Jet black fur, long arms, and a face, not human, not animal, just watching, waiting. On the 5th day, Ray broke. He dropped his gear, started screaming into the woods, cursing it, daring it to show itself. I told him to stop. He didn't. That's when the screaming started, not his ours, from all around us. Our voices echoing, calling our own names, begging for help. I grabbed Ray and ran. Didn't stop until we saw the ranger's cabin on the southern ridge. I turned back once, saw the tree line behind us, It moved, like it took a breath, then went still again. We never found. Bill never found our original trail either. Ray doesn't talk about what happened. Neither do I. I've never been back to Montana, but sometimes I look up videos online. Those so-called Bigfoot sightings, and I don't laugh like I used to, because I know there's something out there. Something ancient, something that waits at the edge of the tree line and doesn't want to be seen. Just felt, and if you stay too long in its woods, you disappear into the trees, just like Bill, just like all the others. One night something happened, which I cannot forget. Something that tore through every belief I had about the world. I was 29, fresh out of a breakup, and mentally wrecked. My buddy Greg offered his family's old hunting cabin as a place to clear my head. Said I could have it for a week. No charge. Just leave the key in the mailbox when I was done. It was in northern Washington, tucked into the foot of the Cascades, a place locals called Timber's Edge. The nearest gas station was 30 minutes away, and cell service vanished the moment I turned off the main road. I didn't care. I wanted to be alone, but by the second night, I realized I wasn't. The cabin was basic, but solid. A wood stove, a cot, some dusty chairs, and a squeaky front porch swing that looked like it hadn't moved in years. It faced a dense wall of trees, pines so thick you couldn't see more than 10 feet into them. The air smelled of moss and cold dirt. On day one, everything was fine. I made coffee, read a book, chopped some wood. It was peaceful. But on the second night, just after 2 a.m., I heard knocking. Not on the door, on the back wall. 3 knocks. Slow, even. I froze in bed, my body refusing to move. The air felt thicker, like it was waiting with me. I finally whispered, "Greg." But I knew it wasn't Greg. There was no vehicle outside, no sound of tires, no footsteps in the gravel, just those 3 knocks. I stayed awake until dawn, and when the sun came up, I went outside to check. No prints, no sign of anyone walking behind the cabin. But as I rounded the corner, I saw something that made me stop breathing. At the base of the back wall, in the mud, AHANDPRINT. No, not a hand, not human, 5 thick, clawed fingers, each one as long as my forearm, and spaced wide, like something with a palm the size of a dinner plate had pressed it there. I packed up, no shame in it. I was ready to leave. That's when I noticed that footprints. They circled the cabin, twice, barefoot, heavy, sunk deep into the ground. Whatever it was had walked around and around while I slept, watching. I tried to leave, got in the car, turned. The key. Nothing. Battery was dead, which made no sense. I'd driven it just that afternoon. I opened the hood and found the battery cable had been ripped clean off. Not cut, ripped, like someone had grabbed it with their bare hands and torn it loose. I knew I couldn't hike out until morning, so I did the only thing I could. I boarded up the windows, locked the door, and loaded the old rifle Greg kept above the mantle. I didn't sleep. Around 11 p.m., I heard it again, knocking, only this time, it was on the roof. Scrape, knock, scrape. It moved from one side to the other, like it was pacing above me. Then came the sound of breathing through the chimney, heavy, wet. ANIMALISTIC. I backed against the door, rifle raised, and whispered over and over, "Please just go, please just go." At 3:12 a.m., everything went silent. Sunrise came like a rescue flare. I didn't even bother packing. I grabbed the essentials, took the bolt from the rifle, and hiked 5 hours through mud and fog until I reached the road. A ranger found me walking barefoot, shaking, with pine needles in my shirt and a look he said he'd seen once before. On a lost hiker they'd found after 2 weeks, dehydrated and wild. I told him about the cabin, about the thing that had circled me in the night. He didn't laugh. He said, "Cabin sent to Yoitu." I nodded. He just shook his head. "We stopped assigning that one after 98. Too many stories." I went back with a tow truck the next week. The cabin was still there. So was my car, and behind the cabin, in the drying mud, new prints. Still barefoot, still massive. But this time, they led away from the wall, and right to the front porch, where the porch swinged, which hadn't moved in years, was slowly rocking, back and forth, like someone had just stood up and walked back into the woods. I was 22 when I took the job that ruined my life. I'd just graduated from a forestry program, still wide-eyed, broke, and hungry for adventure. So when the Washington Department of Natural Resources offered me a temporary survey contract near Mount Rainier, out in the Gifford-Pinchot backcountry, I jumped on it. 5 weeks in the wilderness, cataloging old growth and erosion patterns. Solo. They even gave me a radio, a GPS, and a borrowed horse named Levi 2-pack supplies. What they didn't give me was a warning, but I suppose no one really talks about what's out there. They pretend it's just trees. My assigned zone was called Clearwater Basin, a misnomer, if there ever was one. The creeks ran dark with glacial silt, and the fog. It hung like curtains all day, thick, wet, silent. I set up my tent on a ridgeline about 5 miles from the trailhead. Levi grazed nearby, and I made notes in my journal as the sun fell behind. A wall of moss, covered firs. The first night was calm. The second, it was the third night that changed everything. It started with a scream. Not a coyote, not a cougar. I'd heard both. This was deeper. It came from the valley floor, long, drawn out, like something was being murdered by its own lungs. I sat bolt upright in my sleeping bag, clutching the flare gun. Levi, gone. His lead rope was snapped. I yelled for him, but the scream returned. Closer, and this time it ended in a grunt, low and rattling, like something clearing its throat just outside the tent. I didn't sleep, just stared at the tent wall until dawn turned it gray. In the morning, I found tracks, huge, human-like, but the stride was off, longer, too long for even a tall man, and each print was deep, as if whatever made them weighed 500 pounds. They circled the clearing, passed by the fire pit, then veered back into the mist. Levi hadn't returned. I reported it via radio to the ranger outpost. All I got back was static, then a single reply. "Copy that. Stay alert. Don't engage." Engage what? They didn't say. By the 5th day, the woods were different, quieter. Not just fewer birds, none. No squirrels, no wind in the branches. Even the bugs had gone silent. That night, I built a roaring fire and kept my rifle across my lap. At some point, around 1 a.m., the fog thickened. I couldn't see past the trees anymore. But I heard something breathing, deep, wet, animalistic, just beyond the firelight. I held my breath, then something stepped forward. I only saw it for a second, but I'll never forget it. 8 feet tall, maybe more. Broad hunched shoulders, a face like a gorilla, but more human, smarter. The eyes weren't wild, they were focused, watching, and worst of all, its arms were coated in blood. I fired the flare. It shot upward, bright red, lighting the forest in firelight for 3 perfect seconds. And in that time, I saw others. 3, maybe 4, all standing just outside the fog wall, watching. When the flare died, they didn't come closer. They just melted into the mist. I broke camp at first light, took only my essentials, hiked without stopping for water or rest. I don't even remember walking most of it. just the fear propelling me forward like a ghost was strapped to my spine. I reached the trailhead and found a ranger truck, already waiting. The ranger didn't ask what happened. He didn't even look surprised. He just nodded and said, "We logged your GPS pings. You lasted longer than the last guy." I asked him what it was. He didn't answer, just looked at the woods and said, "They're not all animals out here. Some things know how to wait, how to learn." Then he offered me a ride back to town and told me to never speak of it again. That was 5 years ago. I still have dreams of mist, of tall shapes watching from the edge, and sometimes, when I walk in parks or forests near my new home in Colorado, I catch the scent of moss and blood, and I know they never stayed in Washington. They walk wherever the fog can follow. When I was young, I thought monsters only lived in movies. I grew up in a cabin deep in the Pacific Northwest with my grandfather. He was a stern, quiet man who spent more time tracking elk than talking to people. Our place sat right on the edge of Olympic National Forest. No roads for miles, just dense trees and fog that never seemed to lift. One summer evening, when I was around 11, my grandfather came inside, pale and shaking. That was rare. I remember how he locked every door and window, pulled me close, and said, "No matter what you hear tonight, don't open the door." I thought he was drunk or joking. He wasn't. That night, the woods outside sounded wrong. Not quiet, hollow, like all the usual noises had vanished. No crickets, no owls, just this unnatural emptiness. Then, just after midnight, came the knocking, but it wasn't from a person. Whatever it was didn't knock on the door, it slapped it, hard. Each strike shook the walls. Then came the growling, not like a bear, deeper, broader, almost human. I peered through the window, just for a second. I wish I hadn't. It stood maybe 9 feet tall, massive shoulders, matted black hair, long arms that nearly reached the porch. But the face, it was the face that froze me. It looked almost human, but not quite. Its brow was thick, the nose flat, and the eyes, dark and intelligent, locked onto mine. It knew I was there, and it didn't like it. It roared, a deep bellow that rattled the panes. Then it stepped off the porch and disappeared into the trees. My grandfather didn't say a word for hours. He just sat with his shotgun aimed at the door until dawn. In the morning, the ground was torn up, huge footprints leading to the porch, then away toward the woods. Each print was bigger than my head. We never talked about it, ever. Years later, after my grandfather passed, I found a notebook tucked beneath a floorboard. In it were sketches of that thing, pages of them. He'd seen it before, maybe dozens of times. And the last line written in the book, "It doesn't want the woods. It wants to come inside." One night something happened, which I cannot forget. It was mid-October, and I had taken a solo hiking trip in the Appalachian foothills of Georgia, something I used to do when I needed to disconnect. I brought a lightweight tent, a journal, and just enough supplies for a long weekend. My goal was solitude. The first night went as expected. Quiet, peaceful, a little cold, but nothing I couldn't handle. The second night changed everything. I had set up camp in a hollow just off the trail, surrounded by tall pines and thick brush. I was sitting by a dying fire, scribbling in my journal, when I heard heavy footfalls coming from the slope above me. They weren't deer or a bear. I've spent enough time in the woods to know what wildlife sounds like. This was deliberate, measured, like someone walking upright. I grabbed my flashlight and swept across the trees. Nothing. Then I heard a branch snap, not far off. Something big. I called out, assuming it might be a lost hiker. No answer. Then came a low grunt, deep, almost vibrational. The kind of sound you feel more than hear. I backed up toward my tent and grabbed the small hatchet I kept nearby. The fire was low now, casting long shadows on the tree trunks. I stayed up for hours, listening. Then, just before dawn, I heard breathing, loud, rhythmic, just outside the tent. I didn't move. Whatever it was stood there for a full minute, then let out a breath so strong, it blew dust through the tent seams. When I finally dared unzip the flap after sunrise, the clearing was empty, except for the prints. Massive tracks, nearly twice the size of my boot, circled my campsite. No claw marks like a bear, just wide, flat impressions with long, human-like toes. I followed them for a few dozen yards before they disappeared, literally stopped, mid-stride. I packed up and left within minutes. I haven't camped alone since. That was 4 years ago. I still think about it more than I should. Sometimes I wonder, if I hadn't woken up, if I hadn't listened, what would have happened? Because I know one thing for certain. That night, I wasn't alone, and whatever watched me was smart enough to let me live. I was 24 when it happened to me. I had just taken a job as a wildlife technician in Central Oregon. Basically, a field grunt collecting data in remote areas. It was early spring, and I'd been assigned to monitor elk migration patterns near a forest that bordered a series of tribal lands. My supervisor warned me about staying too long past dusk, but didn't explain why. The first week went fine. The second week, things got off. It started with sound. Every night, just after sundown, the forest would go dead quiet for 10, maybe 15 minutes. No birds, no bugs, no wind. Like something was moving through, and the world just held its breath. Then, the rocks started coming. The first time. I thought it was just coincidence, maybe an animal dislodging something up the slope. But the rocks were heavy, thrown with force, and they landed just close enough to make a point. It kept happening, 3 nights in a row, always from different directions. On the 4th night, I set up a thermal camera on a tree facing my tent the next morning. When I checked the footage, I stopped breathing at around 3:17 a.m. The tree line lit up with a single, enormous heat signature. It wasn't a bear. The proportions were wrong, too tall, too upright. It walked on 2 legs across the field, stopping 20 feet from my tent. It just stood there watching. Then it turned and walked back into the woods. That was the night. I left camp early. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just packed and hiked 10 miles to the nearest service road before sunrise. I reported the incident to my supervisor. He didn't ask for the footage, just nodded, handed me a new assignment, and said, "Some places aren't meant for us." That was it. No explanation. No follow-up. 2 months later, someone else was sent to that site. I heard he lasted only 1 night before quitting. Wouldn't speak about it to anyone. I still have the thermal footage saved to a hard drive in my closet. I've never shared it, because some truths aren't meant to be spread. Some things, like what walks up right through the woods when the world goes silent, aren't looking to be found. One evening I was dizzy. Not from spinning, not from sickness, but from something far stranger. I was alone in a watchtower deep in the Bitterroot Range of Montana, working my first full season as a fire lookout. You'd think isolation would be the hard part, but I'd always loved solitude, stillness, peace. What I wasn't prepared for was being watched back. It started with shadows, not the kind you see from trees shifting in the wind, but tall, slow, moving ones that crossed the clearing beneath the tower at dusk. I told myself it was my imagination, trick of the light. But then came the smell. On still nights, the wind would carry this rotting animal, like musk, up into the tower. Something wrong, too earthy, too heavy. Then, on the 12th night, I saw it. I was using binoculars just after sunset, scanning the northern tree line, when I noticed movement. Something huge, too upright for a bear, too bulky for a man. Its head nearly brushed the branches as it moved. At first, I thought it might be some kind of prank, a guy in a suit. Then I saw it run. No man that size moves like that. Graceful, fast, almost floating over the brush. It reached the base of the tower and stopped. I backed away from the window. Heart thudding. Then came the breathing. Heavy, controlled. Deliberate. I held my breath as it circled the tower. The floorboards creaked beneath me as I tried not to move. Then, like that, the presence was gone. The next morning, I climbed down and checked the base. Giant tracks, barefoot, wider than my head, with impressions sunk deep into the soil. I radioed it in. My supervisor said to keep a log and not engage. That's all. No surprise in his voice. That's when I realized he already knew. The rest of the season passed like a dream. I kept seeing it, always at dusk, always watching from a distance, never approaching again, but making sure I saw it, like it was curious, like it was letting me stay. Now I avoid towers, avoid silence. Sometimes, when the wind shifts and the trees fall still, I swear I can smell that same earthy rot, even back home in town. Maybe it followed me, maybe it never had to. When I was 16, I thought I was invincible. That was the summer I spent with my cousin Eli on his parents' property in southern Washington, near the Gifford Pinchot Forest. Their land stretched for miles, old logging roads, pine groves, and hills blanketed in thick moss. It was the kind of place where the nearest neighbor was an hour away, and no one locked their doors, because who would come? That mindset changed by the end of the month. It started with a scream. We were out past dark on the back trail, where we used to ride dirt bikes. No lights, just the moon and a pair of cheap flashlights. I remember we were walking back when we heard it, somewhere deep in the trees. Something let out this howl, scream hybrid that froze both of us in place. It wasn't a coyote, it wasn't a bear. It sounded like something trying to sound human, but wrong, warped. Like it didn't have the right mouth for the job. Eli wanted to go toward the sound. I didn't, but we both froze again when we heard footsteps. Big ones. Something heavy moving through the brush, breaking limbs like twigs. We killed the flashlights, stood dead still. Then, maybe 20 yards ahead, something stood up. I say something, because I refuse to call it a man. It had the size of a linebacker in a ghillie suit, but it moved like a predator, slow, deliberate, no hesitation. It paused and turned, like it was scanning. Then it started walking straight toward us. We bolted. I've never run so hard in my life. I didn't care about branches slapping my face or the rocks beneath my shoes. I just ran until my lungs burned. We didn't stop until we saw the lights of the farmhouse. Later, shaking and covered in scrapes, we tried to explain it to Eli's dad. He listened, really listened, then poured himself a drink and said, "So, you saw it too, huh?" That night, he pulled out an old photo album from a locked drawer. Inside were blurry, black and white shots of something enormous, caught between trees. Footprints beside his hunting stand. Something tall, dragging a deer carcass through the snow. He said it had been around for decades, never attacked, never came close to the house, but always watching. I never went back into those woods. Eli did. A few years later, he disappeared. They found his dirt bike upside down in the brush a mile from the house. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just drag marks, huge ones, that vanished into the trees. They said it was a bear attack, but bears don't walk on two legs, and bears don't come back years later to scream from the edge of the woods behind the house. Last time I visited, I slept with a rifle next to my bed. I still don't feel safe. One night something happened which I cannot forget. It was late September, and I had taken a seasonal gig with a logging company out in northern Idaho. The kind of job that kept you out in the forest for days at a time, sleeping in trailers and working long shifts with chainsaws and harvesters. I wasn't new to logging, but this area was different, quiet in a way that didn't feel right, like the forest was listening. The guys had stories. One old-timer named Carl called it the long shadow. He said every few years, someone would see it. Tall, black-eyed, more hair than man. Everyone laughed when he said it, but nobody ever followed him when he went into the trees alone. I should have listened. The night it happened, I'd stayed back to fix a busted gas line on one of the trucks. Everyone else had gone down the road to the tavern in town, and I didn't feel like drinking. I liked the quiet, or I thought I did. Around 11 p.m., I heard a knock on the trailer. 3 soft knocks, not like someone in a rush, just intentional. I opened the door, expecting maybe Carl had come back early, but there was no one there. I stepped out onto the gravel, sweeping my flashlight across the clearing. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the woods, it was standing, perfectly still between 2 trees, huge, shoulders like a bear, but taller than any man I'd ever seen. The light caught its eyes, and they shone, not like animal eyes, more like glass reflecting headlights. No blink, no movement, just watching. Then it stepped back, so slow and smooth, it barely made a sound. I should have gone inside, locked the door, but I couldn't move. I stood frozen on the step, my breath short, and then it whistled. A low, 2-tone whistle, like someone mimicking a bird call, but not quite getting it right. Then another whistle answered it, from behind the trailer. I ran inside and locked every bolt. Didn't sleep, didn't blink. Sat with a wrench in my lap and a fire axe by the door. In the morning, I walked the perimeter. I found footprints the size of dinner plates circling the trailer, barefoot, 5 toes. The gravel was disturbed behind the truck, like something had knelt there for a long time. Watching through the windows, when the others got back, I didn't tell them everything. Just said I saw something big in the woods. Carl looked at me real slow and said, "You heard the whistle?" I nodded. He didn't laugh this time, just patted my shoulder and said, "You're lucky it was just one night." I quit the job a week later, and I haven't set foot in a forest since. Sometimes, when I'm in my apartment late at night and the windows cracked open, I think I hear that whistle again. Always the same tune, always just out of reach, like something reminding me it hasn't forgotten. When I was 19, I thought I was being followed by a ghost. That was easier to believe than the truth. I was working the summer season as a trail maintenance assistant at a state park in northern Georgia, helping clear paths and repair footbridges. It was mostly grunt work, but I loved being in the woods, away from city noise. My job site was a 6-mile loop called Pine Ridge Trail, dense forest, rocky inclines, and barely a signal on any phone. Everything was fine for the first 2 weeks. Quiet, uneventful, until the noises started. I'd be out there alone sometimes, ahead of the others with a saw or rake. That's when I'd hear it, twigs snapping behind me. Once or twice I'd hear breathing. Not mine. Something deep, like a low exhale from a chest much bigger than a man's. I'd spin around, expecting to see a bear. Nothing. It happened so often, I started talking out loud, thinking it might scare off whatever animal was tailing me. But it never left. It just stayed back, always watching, always waiting for me to turn my back again. Then came the footprints. I found them just off the path. Enormous prints in the soft mud, each at least 16 inches long. No shoes, just 5 perfect toe marks and a deep heel. I took pictures, showed my supervisor. He went pale, said it was probably a prank by one of the locals, but his hands were shaking. That night, we stayed late, cleaning up after a storm. By the time we finished, it was pitch black, and I had to hike the last mile to the truck alone with a flashlight. That's when I saw it. It was standing right in the middle of the trail, maybe 30 feet ahead. My light caught it mid-turn. It wasn't a bear, not even close. It stood like a man but was almost twice my height. Thick black hair covering everything but the palms of its hands and the pads of its feet. Its eyes reflected light, like a cat's. Glowing amber. It didn't move, didn't growl. It just looked at me, long enough for me to feel like it was weighing something. Then it turned and disappeared into the woods. Without a sound, I didn't tell anyone the full story. Just said I saw a bear and ran. But I knew better, because the next morning, I found something hanging from the tree where it stood, a dead rabbit, gutted and tied up by its back legs with vines, fresh. No animal did that. That's when I knew it. Had been watching for days, not stalking me, studying me. I quit that week, packed my stuff and left without looking back. But sometimes, when I'm walking at night and hear the crunch of a branch, I remember how it felt to be prey, not to a wild animal, but to something far more intelligent and far more patient. I was 32 when it happened to me. I'd just gone through a rough divorce and needed space, real space. So I rented a remote cabin in the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. It was one of those off-grid setups, wood stove, pump well, satellite, radio, if you aimed it right. The owner had only one rule: don't go beyond the creek at night. I thought it was just a way of saying stay off the neighbor's property, even though there were no neighbors for miles. But I found out the hard way what he really meant. My first few days were peaceful. I chopped wood, read, drank too much whiskey, hiked in the day, slept like a rock at night, but on the 4th night, I woke up cold, not chilled, cold. The fire had gone out, and the temperature had dropped more than it should have for early fall. I got up to stoke the fire, and just before lighting the match, I looked outside. There was something standing at the tree line. At first, I thought it was a bear, big, black, hunkered down. But it rose, stood up, and it was taller than the cabin. Dordock just stood there, watching. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found massive footprints just outside the porch. No claw marks. Just huge, human-like prints leading toward the creek and stopping. No return prints. I told myself I was dreaming, sleep-deprived, crazy. But then the sound started, low whistles, branches snapping in pairs. Once, something tapped the glass, just once, and was gone. On the 7th night, I broke the rule. I went beyond the creek. I had to know what was out there. I strapped on my headlamp, took my hunting knife, and crossed the rickety bridge with a lantern in hand. The forest felt wrong, still, but not calm. 10 20 yards in, I found another footprint, then another, then something else. Bones. Dozens of small animal bones arranged in a circle, some freshly stripped, some clean, like they'd been there for years. That's when I heard it. Not growling, not howling, breathing, slow, rhythmic, heavy, close. Then I saw it. It stepped from behind a tree, 8, maybe 9 feet tall, hair matted and dark like wet moss. Its face wasn't human, but it had intelligence. Its eyes didn't shine, they absorbed light, like looking into 2 endless wells. It didn't roar. It didn't charge. It just raised one hand, almost like a warning, and pointed back toward the cabin. That's when I realized. It was telling me to leave. Not just the woods, the entire area. I turned and ran like hell, made it back to the cabin, locked every bolt, didn't sleep, packed the truck at dawn, and was gone before the sun cleared the trees. I called the owner weeks later and told him everything. He was quiet for a long time, then said, "You're lucky. It gave you a warning. Others don't get one. I haven't gone camping since. And when people talk about Bigfoot like it's some joke or blurry shadow in the trees, I stay quiet because I've seen it, and I think it let me live." One evening I was dizzy. I hadn't eaten much. Just hiked 12 miles up the Appalachian Trail in Tennessee with a 50-pound pack, and the air had gotten thinner the higher I went. I pitched my tent near an old fire ring just off a ridge. Overlook. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the crickets seemed to have left. I remember setting down my gear and thinking something felt off, but I chalked it up to exhaustion and maybe dehydration. It wasn't until the sun set that I realized I wasn't alone. At first it was just small things, a stick cracking too close to camp, the sound of something heavy brushing against branches. No birds, no squirrels, just this tension. Then, while boiling water for freeze, dried stew, I heard breathing deep, slow, and wet, sounding like lungs too big for a man's chest. I turned fast, expecting a bear, but saw nothing. Not yet. I ate quickly and zipped myself inside the tent before full darkness set in. I kept my headlamp on, blade within reach, and laid there, trying to rationalize everything. That's when the breathing returned, closer now. I heard soft thuds in the dirt. Something walking. I turned off the light, held my breath. A shadow passed over the thin nylon wall of my tent. Massive, tall, and strangely hunched. It paused, then knelt, and I swear I saw the faint outline of a hand press against the fabric. Not claws, fingers. Long, too long, too long. Almost like they didn't belong to anything born in nature. I didn't scream, didn't even move. Just closed my eyes and begged for morning. Eventually, the presence moved off into the trees. I stayed frozen, soaked in sweat, until sunrise. Then I broke down camp in under 10 minutes and started down the mountain. Halfway back, I found something waiting for me on the trail. A small pile of rocks, 7 of them, stacked carefully, and on top, a tuft of hair, black coarse, still smelling like damp leaves and rot. I didn't tell the ranger what happened. Didn't tell my friends either. But a few weeks later, I came across a forum where hikers shared strange wilderness stories. One post stopped me cold. Saw a pile of rocks just like you described. Thought it was some hiker art until I heard the knocking in the woods that night. 3 knocks, like it was calling something. Something big. That's when it clicked. What followed me wasn't an animal. It wasn't curious. It was claiming something. I haven't hiked alone since. And sometimes, when I'm walking city trails, or even just passing tree lines at dusk, I feel it, watching, remembering, maybe, waiting for me to go back to where I don't belong. When I was 17, I made a mistake. I still regret that my cousin Jake and I used to spend every summer together in Oregon. We were reckless, full of teenage bravado, and always dared each other into stupid things. That year, we decided we were finally old enough to camp alone, deep in the Willamette National Forest, off trail, far from campsites and cell signal. We told our parents we were staying at the lake, like usual. Instead, we packed 2 cheap tents, some instant noodles, a flashlight, each, and a couple of old hunting knives. We wanted to prove we could handle the wild. What we got was something else entirely. We hiked almost 6 hours into the woods before picking a spot near a half-dried creek bed. It was beautiful in the way that only remote wilderness is. Thick trees, moss, covered stones, no trash, no signs of people. The first night was fine. Cool breeze, a sky full of stars, the sound of crickets and frogs. But the second night, something changed. The woods went silent just after dark. Not slowly, like the birds were bedding down, but all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. Jake noticed it too. He said it out loud. "Why is it so quiet?" Then the knocking started. 3 knocks. Slow, heavy, like someone was banging a thick branch against a tree. I froze. I wanted to believe it was just some animal, or maybe even a woodpecker, but these weren't random taps. They came with rhythm, intention. Jake grabbed his flashlight and flicked it on, but it barely pierced the darkness. We stood back to back, listening. Then came the second knock, closer, then a third, right behind us. We spun around, but there was nothing. Then came the breathing. It was like something huge was exhaling just behind the tree line. The sound was so low, so deep, it vibrated in my ribs. But when we shined the light that way, we saw nothing. And then Jake's flashlight flickered out. We ran. We left our tents, our gear, everything but the knives in our pockets, and bolted down the creek bed in the dark, crashing into thorns and branches. After 20 minutes of panic, we finally stopped when we saw moonlight reflecting off something metallic, an old, rusted trail marker. We thought we were safe. We were wrong. That's when I saw it. Just beyond the trail sign, in the dark between trees, stood a figure. It was still, too still. It had to be over 8 feet tall, shoulders wider than any man, covered in dark, shaggy hair. Its face was hidden by shadows, but I could see the eyes, reflecting pale blue. They didn't blink. It took a step forward, but not like a man, or even a bear. It leaned forward, like its spine wasn't built the way ours is, like it had too many joints. Jake grabbed my arm. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was locked in place. Then it whistled, just once. A long, slow whistle that didn't sound like any bird or human. Something was wrong with it, like it was mimicking sound, but couldn't quite copy it right. Jake pulled me again, and we ran. We didn't stop until we reached the highway sometime after dawn, collapsed on the shoulder, covered in scrapes and mud. A trucker picked us up and said we looked like we'd seen a ghost. We told our parents we'd gotten lost. Never mentioned the creature, but Jake still has the scar on his thigh from falling during that run, and I still have dreams of those blue eyes in the dark. Years later, I went back with a better map, some gear, and a camera, but the place was different. Our tents were gone. No footprints, no trash. It was like we had never been there, except for one thing. Carved into a tree near where we'd camped was a symbol. 7 vertical lines, curved like claws. It hadn't been there before. It was fresh. One night something happened which I cannot forget. It was the end of November, the last weekend before hunting season closed, and I was out near the Washito Mountains in Arkansas with my friend Caleb. We had access to a cabin that belonged to his uncle, a 1-room shack, tucked deep into government land. No electricity, no running water, just an old wood stove, 2 cots, and enough dry goods to last us the weekend. Caleb's family had hunted this area for decades. They always joked about the woodwalker, some local legend about a spirit that kept watch over the forest. Thought it was just a backwoods campfire tale. I don't anymore. The first day went well. We didn't bag anything, but we tracked a couple deer and marked some spots to check again in the morning. At dusk, we returned to the cabin, cold but content. We cooked beans over the fire, had a few drinks, and passed out early. At about 2 a.m., something woke me. It wasn't a sound. It was the absence of sound. The fire had burned low, and the woods had gone dead silent. I sat up in my cot, squinting through the gloom. Caleb was still asleep, snoring lightly. Then I heard it. Soft, deliberate crunches in the snow just outside the cabin. Heavy footsteps, too heavy for a deer, too spaced out for a bear, and they were bipedal. I crept toward the door and placed my ear against it. The footsteps stopped. Then, something sniffed loudly, wetly, right against the other side of the wood. I backed away slowly, knife shaking in my hand. Then came the knock, 3 slow, booming knocks, like a tree trunk slamming against the porch. Caleb shot awake, startled. I looked at him and whispered, "It's outside." We sat in total silence. The thing didn't move for maybe 10 minutes. Then it let out this low, vibrating growl, not aggressive, but deep, like a warning. Then it walked off into the woods. But it didn't go far. For the next hour, we heard it circling the cabin. Sometimes it would stop for minutes at a time. Once, it tapped the back wall 3 times. Tap, 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 almost like it was counting. At dawn, we finally dared to go outside. The snow around the cabin was shredded. Tracks everywhere. Huge, human, like maybe 17 inches long. No claws, just thick toes and a wide arch. And the smell, something sour, musky, like wet fur and rotted bark. We packed up and left right then. On our way down the trail, Caleb stopped in the center of the path, arranged in a perfect X, were 2 broken deer antlers, fresh. Neither of us had seen any deer since the previous morning. Back at town, we showed the photos of the prints to the game warden. He looked at them for a long time, then handed the phone back and said, "Some things out there don't want to be seen. You're lucky that's all it did." That was 5 years ago. Caleb won't talk about it anymore. Won't go into the woods. He moved to Phoenix. Said he wants to be somewhere he can see the horizon. As for me, every time I step off the trail, I feel it. Not fear exactly, but something close, like the trees are watching, and something just beyond them is waiting. I was 19 when it happened to me. I had just dropped out of college. Things weren't going great. Bad grades, worse choices, and a fallout with my dad that ended with me packing up and leaving town. My mom's cousin had an old RV parked near Mount Baker in Washington, and he said I could crash there for a few weeks while I figured things out. It was isolated, really isolated. Tucked behind 2 miles of gravel road and surrounded by pines so thick the sun barely touched the forest floor. At first it felt like the escape I needed. No traffic, no people, just me, my notebook, and the cold wind through the trees. But the forest doesn't like to be quiet for too long. And I think, somehow, it noticed me. The first thing I heard was the knocking. 3 slow thuds. Deep in the woods. Just as the sun dipped low. It came again the next night. Always 3 knocks. Always just before dark. I told myself it was just trees shifting, or maybe a bear brushing past a trunk. But then came the rocks. Small ones, tossed at the side of the RV late at night. Not random, not like falling debris. They'd hit in sequence. Tap, tap, pause, then tap again. Always from a different side. I started sleeping with a flashlight and a tire iron beside me. Still didn't tell anyone, because deep down, I think, I already knew. One night, around midnight, the wind cut off completely. No rustling, no howling, just dead silence. Then I heard it breathing. Right outside the RV, the metal creaked, just slightly, as something leaned against it. I held my breath. It stayed there for almost 5 minutes, dragging something, fingernails, claws, along the siding dot. Then it walked away. I waited another hour before I dared peek through the blinds. There were footprints, not boot prints, bare footprints. The next morning, I followed them. Not far, just far enough to realize they went in a perfect circle around the RV before vanishing, behind a cluster of thick cedar, and in the center of that clearing, a deer's rib cage, just the ribs, picked clean, laid out neatly on the moss like some twisted offering. That was the day I decided to leave. I packed everything and called a local tow guy to get the RV out. While I waited near the road, I heard the knocking again, closer this time. When the driver arrived, he asked, "You've been camping back here alone?" I nodded. He just shook his head and said, "This land belongs to something else. You know, I've never been back. Sometimes I still wake up sweating from dreams of heavy footsteps crunching gravel outside my window, and once in a while, I find myself checking the backyard at night, just in case. Because whatever was out there that winter, it knew I didn't belong, and it didn't want me to forget." One night something happened, which I cannot forget. It was late August, and I had taken a job as a trail maintenance worker for a small conservation group in northern Idaho. I was stationed in a remote sector near the Clearwater National Forest, living out of a canvas tent with a radio, a lantern, and a week's supply of rations. I'd go 5 days without seeing another human. I liked the solitude at first, the tall pines, endless trails, and the quiet gave me room to think, something I'd needed badly after the breakup and the burnout from the city. But nature has a strange way of testing people, and sometimes, when you stare into the trees long enough, you start to feel like something's staring back by the third night. I realized that feeling wasn't just in my head. I was clearing brush about 2 miles from my campsite when I found the footprints. Massive, wide, set, with clear toe impressions, barefoot, despite the rocky terrain. They crossed the trail at a diagonal and led up a slope where no human would have gone barefoot. I bent down and measured them with my hand. 18 inches long, 5 inches deep in dry dirt, too big to be fake. I felt a chill then, not from fear, but from a sense that I had just walked into someone else's space. That night, I kept the lantern on longer than usual. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a low humming noise, like a deep, vibrating growl, just outside the tent. I sat up, heart pounding, and grabbed my hatchet. Then I heard the sniffing. Something was walking around the tent, slowly, dragging something heavy behind it. I held my breath and didn't move. For nearly 10 minutes, it circled me, pausing now and then, breathing deep. Then silence. I stayed frozen until dawn. When I finally stepped outside, there was a stick structure in front of my tent. 3 thick branches leaned together like a crude tripod, and at its center was a bundle of pine needles tied together with deer sinew. An offering, a warning. I didn't know, but I no longer felt welcome. I reported it to the ranger station, and they told me to stay put until someone could come check it out the next day. But I didn't last that long. That evening, I was boiling water when I heard a distant, echoing scream. Not a cougar, not a bear. This was deeper, resonant, like a man yelling through a cave. It rose in pitch until it cracked like a thunderclap. then went silent. I grabbed my pack, stuffed in only the essentials, and took off down the trail. I didn't care about protocol. I didn't care about the job. I just wanted to survive the night. I hiked through dusk and well into darkness, my flashlight dying by the hour. Every few minutes, I'd hear movement in the woods beside me, branches snapping, heavy footsteps keeping pace. Then something stepped onto the trail behind me. I didn't turn around. I just ran. I made it to the fire road by dawn, where a passing logging crew found me, scratched and exhausted, muttering nonsense. They drove me to the ranger station, where I filed a report. They humored me, but I could tell they'd heard it before. One old ranger pulled me aside and said, "We don't talk about it, but it's real. You're lucky it let you leave." I never went back. Sometimes, when I walk past pine trees, I get this crawling feeling on the back of my neck, like something ancient and angry is still watching me, wondering why I ran, and what it would have done if I hadn't.